all the listeners and audiences. I'm Cikgu Lina from SMK Bandar Serikay. I'm presenting to you a study of test anxiety among Form 6 students in a speaking test in Malaysia. This is the action research that I did. So here I'm presenting it to you. First of all, I will start with the reflection of previous learning facilities. For Form 6 students, it's compulsory for them to sit for the MOIT exam. So this exam, normally preparation will start the very moment the students registered for the Form 6. Thereby, they'll be given a briefing and details of the speaking test. This is done during the orientation week. After the orientation week, the students will be having their MOIT classes with their respective teachers. Then the subject teacher prepares them for their speaking test, various activities and speaking practices. They will be briefed about what the test is like, what is the expected of the candidates. Okay. Initially, the teacher provides guidance of ideas, phrases and words to enhance their speaking test. From my opinion, normally, Form 5 leavers, they are shy, they're timid, they are reluctant to speak. So as a MOIT teacher, I will be giving them ideas, how to organize the ideas, how to present their answer. I even provided them with phrases and words. As we go along, I will reduce the amount of guidance as in the model of diminishing control. This is adapted from Funk, 2008. This model illustrates that in learning process, the role of the teacher diminishes as the role of the students increases. So automatically, students will be independent learners, whereby they will be fully responsible for their learning. As the students become more independent of their learning, the teacher facilitates and increases the amount of tasks and the level of the task difficulties. This is based on the learning curve graph, adapted from Bellamy's 2020. It is said that a student's efficiency in a task improves over time. The more the learner performs the task, the better they will be. This has been the previous learning and facilitating practices by MOIT subject teachers. Now, let's look at the research focus. All Form 6 students, we focus on the perceptions of the Form 6 students on specifically anxiety when taking the actual MOIT speaking test. And this research also attempts to answer the questions stated in these research objectives. To ascertain how far the use of social media, specifically WhatsApp recording and personal guidance, will help to reduce anxiety level amongst students. Now, let's move on to the research objectives. Okay? The research objectives: 1. To identify test anxiety as perceived by Form 6 students in a secondary school in Sarawak. That's my school. Now, the research questions. These are the list of research questions. What are the students' perception of anxiety during test? Perception of test defensive, anxiety avoidance, anxiety interpretation, anxiety reappraisal, anxiety reaction, anxiety feedback, anxiety coping. And lastly, the last question: to what extent the use of social media, WhatsApp, reduce test anxiety among students. Okay, next we have the problem statement or statement of problem. Alright, you find that research on test anxiety in Malaysia are rare. The last one being done by Rosanna Sani in 2019. I also have another one that I found is by Dust 2017. However, researchers done in this aspect in other countries have been widely investigated since 1929. The most established one, and the one that is most referred to, is Saracen and Mandela. Saracen and Mandela started this in 1952. It generally touched on test anxiety and academic performance because test anxiety and academic performance, they are closely linked. However, there is yet any researchers on mock speaking test anxiety among Form 6 students in Malaysia. So I suppose this is the very first one. So I hope this paper will shed some light on the status of test anxiety among Form 6 students in Malaysia and what are the underlying characteristics of this phenomenon. So I've got this conceptual framework of study, right? So we got the test stimulus, and then we got the A-state reaction. Between that, we have the coping, how the student cope, whether the students are coping with the anxiety or they are avoiding or they have been defensive about the anxiety. Next, we have the active state, then the feedback, and then it goes on. As it goes on, you find that the anxiety level drops if the students are learning to cope with it. Okay, since this is just a summary of my research, I will basically go through this briefly. My research finding in terms of the factor analysis, one is to validate the test anxiety questionnaire, that is, the abbreviation is TAQ. Construct. The TAQ construct factor analysis was carried out on the data sample. Principal components analysis extracted 8 components with aging value greater than 1, explaining the 70% of the total variance. Next, a varimax rotation was applied to determine more clearly, delineate the factor structure. Right. I have table 4 in the full paper, shows the 8 factor and analysis of the 37 items with high factor loading 0.32 to 0.67 on each factor. A label for each factor was inferred from the content of the items loading on the factor. The 8 scales measured by TAQ with regard to test anxiety are anxiety during test, anxiety defensive, anxiety avoidance, anxiety interpretation, anxiety reappraisal, anxiety reaction, anxiety feedback, and anxiety coping. Then the second component of my research finding is the alpha reliability. The overall combat alpha reliability of the TAQ, which consists of 37 items, is 0.737, which is considered good and acceptable. Right. The third part of my finding is descriptive analysis. The overall mean for the TAQ before the use of WhatsApp guide is 20.1 out of maximum whole total of 38.0, and the standard deviation is 5.82. The mean after the use of the WhatsApp guide is 17.5 out of the total 38.0. Standard deviation is 4.31. This means that test anxiety is the real psychological problem faced by the 6 students with regards to test taking. So you can see the comparison in terms of the standard deviation before and after the use of the WhatsApp media to help students with their speaking anxiety. Right. You find that when the WhatsApp guide was introduced, students had more opportunity to practice. It is crucial to alleviate test anxiety because when I ask students to do the speaking, they will speak, they will record, and then they will choose from the best recording to be forwarded to me. And then you find that from this, they improve a lot. Therefore, serious action should be considered by my subject teacher concerned to alleviate, to enlighten or diminish the test anxiety among these students. The following analysis discusses further each subscale of the TAQ construct among the students. I've got the full report and I've got the full analysis in my research paper. Right? I will conclude the finding. So this is the conclusion. Students have mixed perception regarding test anxiety. But it was also found that test anxiety is a real phenomenon experienced by these Form 6 students. So, teachers should provide sufficient guide and practices such as social media like WhatsApp before the actual speaking test. The type of anxiety experienced is, on the whole, state anxiety, not threat anxiety. So, basically, appropriate steps should be taken to balance the students' assessment into other forms of assessment such as performance, portfolio assessment, or authentic assessment, which can also be introduced. It's not just solely speaking tests. This will definitely minimize the students' anxiety. Lastly, I have some suggestions of subsequent research. My students definitely needed plenty of guidance and urge to propel them, to push them to achieve at least a band 3 in MOIT speaking test, because this will definitely affect their overall achievement. I had, in this research, I had zoomed into students' anxiety. Those are the different types of anxiety that I've mentioned and which I've also discussed in depth in my research. The overall MOIT achievement, right, comprises of students' performance in 4 skills: listening, speaking, reading, and writing. This is just for your information. However, if the students are not able to speak, definitely they will lose a lot of marks in that, which will again affect their overall performance in MOIT. And the banding that they get for MOIT is very important for their entrance into university. That's all from me. Thank you.